Hello everyone, welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. This is a commander deck video. This is a commander deck I've been working on for a while. I've got to pretty much to where I want it, unless more stuff comes out that can go in it. I will modify the deck as new cards get released. But we are running a red-green deck with Ulasht the Hate Seed as our commander. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Legendary creature Hydra, it's a 0/0. It comes into play with a number of 1/1 counters on it for each other red creature you control, and a number of +1/+1 counters on it for each other green creature you control. I can pay 1 to remove a +1/+1 counter from it, to choose one, which is either have it deal 1 damage to target creature, or put a 1/1 green sapling creature token into play. Let's move into our lands. We are running 17 forests. We're also running 8 mountains. Into the non-basic lands, we have a Cinder Glade, taps for either red or green, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. We have 1 command tower, just tap to add add mana to your mana pool of any one color in your commander's color identity, so we either be tapping it for red or green. We have 1 game trail. As it enters a battlefield, you may reveal a mountain or forest card from your hand. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, and then it taps for either red or green. We have a Gruul Turf. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for red and green. We have 1 Oran-Rief, the Vastwood. It enters the battlefield tapped. It taps for green. Or I can also tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. We have Reliquary Tower. You have no maximum hand size. It also just taps to add 1 colorless to your mana pool. We have Rugged Highlands. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life, and then it taps for either red or green. We have Temple of Abandon. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, scry 1, and then taps for either red or green. We have a terrain generator. It taps for 1 colorless. You could also pay 2 colorless and tap it to put a basic land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. And we have Terramorphic Expanse. Tap it, sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land card, and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. We're going to go into our artifacts. We are running Altar of the Brood, 1 mana. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. We have a Bow of Nylea. 1 colorless, 2 green for a legendary enchantment artifact. Attacking creatures you control have Death Touch. I can also then pay 1 in a green to tap it and choose one of these following options. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Bow of Nylea deals 2 damage to target creature with flying. Gain 3 life. Or put up to the top 4 cards from your graveyard on the bottom of your library in any order. We have an Explorer Scope, 1 mana. Artifact Equipment. Whenever the equipped creature attacks, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped. Costs 1 to equip. We have General's Regalia, 3 mana. You can then pay 3. The next time a source of your choice would deal damage to you this turn, that damage is dealt to a target creature you control instead. It's a good way to kind of redirect damage to some creatures, like token creatures would be the best thing to have this damage get redirected to. We have Hammer of Purphoros, 1 and 2 red, another legendary enchantment artifact. Creatures you control have haste. Pay 2 in a red, tap it, sacrifice the land, put a 3/3 colorless golem enchantment artifact creature token onto the battlefield. I'm mostly using this just to give the creatures haste. I don't really plan on using it to create golems. We have Lightning Coils, 3 mana artifact. Whenever a non-token creature you control is put into a graveyard from play, put a charge counter on Lightning Coils. Beginning of your upkeep, if Lightning Coils has 5 or more charge counters on it, remove all of them from it and put that many 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste into play, or remove them from the game at the end of the turn. We have a Mage Slayer, 1 and red and green. Artifact Equipment. Whenever the equipped creature attacks, it deals damage equal to its power to the defending player. Costs 3 to equip. So obviously put this on a heavy hitter and just tap it to do a massive amount of damage possibly. We have Panharmonicon, or mana, artifact. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So I have a lot of stuff that does damage when stuff enters, so Panharmonicon will get me multiple triggers on those. We have the Soul Ring, 1 mana, just taps for 2 colorless. And finally, in our artifacts, we have Sword of the Animist, 2 mana, legendary artifact equipment, equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever the equipped creature attacks, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library, and it costs 2 to equip. We're going to get into our creatures. Once we get into our enchantments, you'll start seeing why certain cards are in the deck. So we are running an Apocalypse Hydra, X green and red, or red and green, 0/0. It enters the battlefield with a number of X +1/+1 counters on it. If X is 5 or more, it enters the battlefield with an additional X +1/+1 counters. I can pay 1 in a red to remove a counter from Apocalypse Hydra, and it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. You have Avatar of the Resolute, 2 green for a 3/2 with Reach and Trample. It also enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it for each other creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. We have Borborygmos, however that's pronounced. 3 mana, 2 red, 2 green for a 6/7 with Trample. Whenever it deals combat damage, or whenever he deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So as you can see, the deck has to deal with +1/+1 counters quite a bit. Next up, we have the Cytoplast Root-Kin, 2 and 2 green for a 0/0 with Graft 4. So it enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, they may move a counter from this creature onto it. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. And for 2 mana, I can move a +1/+1 counter from target creature I control onto Cytoplast Root-Kin. Next up, we have Dragonlair Spider. So 2 colorless, 2 red, 2 green for a 5/6 with Reach. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. We have Forgotten Ancient, 3 and a green for a 0/3. Whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Forgotten Ancient. Beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of +1/+1 counters from Forgotten Ancient onto other creatures. We have Gladehart Cavalry, 5 and 2 green for a 6/6. When it enters the battlefield, it has support 6. So put a +1/+1 counter on each up to 6 target creatures. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, you gain 2 life. We have Grand Warlord Radha, 2 and red and green for a 3/4 with haste. It's a legendary creature. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control attack, add that much mana in any combination of red and or green into your mana pool. Until the end of the turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Next up, we have Hamletback Goliath, 6 and a red for a 6/6. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you may put X +1/+1 counters on Hamletback Goliath, where X is that creature's power. So whenever creatures enter, they'll just give him a ton of +1/+1 counters. We have Hooded Hydra, X and 2 green for a 0/0. Enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When it dies, put a 1/1 green snake creature token onto the battlefield for each 1/1 counter on it. It has Morph, so you can unmorph it for 3 and 2 green. And as it is turned face up, put 5 +1/+1 counters on it. So if you do the Morph, you basically he comes in with 5 counters on it anyway. We have Hydra Omnivore, 4 and 2 green for an 8/8. Whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent. So if this attacks and let's say it doesn't get blocked, it will do damage to that player plus all the other players or all the other opponents. We have Colonian Hydra, 3 and 2 green for a 0/0 with Trample. It enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever it attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. So when this guy basically attacks, you just get a ton of 1/1 counters on your other creatures as well. We have Kiki Jiki Mirror, 2 and 3 red for a 2/2 with haste. Tap, put a token that's a copy of target non-legendary creature you control onto the battlefield. The token has haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. You then have Mana Gorger Hydra, 2 and a green for a 1/1 with Trample. Whenever a player casts a spell, put a 1/1 counter on Mana Gorger Hydra. We have Mina and Den Wildborn, 2 red and green for a 4/4. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Red and green, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Target creature gains trample until the end of turn. You have a Mistcutter Hydra, X and green for a 0/0. It can't be countered. It has haste and protection from blue, and it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. You have the Nessian Wilds Ravager, 4 and 2 green for a 6/6 with Tribute 6. As this creature enters the battlefield, your opponent of your choice may place 6/1/1 counters on it. When it enters the battlefield, if Tribute wasn't paid, you may have it fight another target creature. We have Nylea, God of the Hunt, 3 and a green for a 6/6 legendary enchantment creature, which is a god. Indestructible. As long as your devotion to green is less than 5, Nylea isn't a creature. Other creatures you control have trample, and for 3 and a green, target creature gets +2/+2 until the end of turn. You have Omnath, Locus of Rage. It's 3, 2 red, 2 green for a 5/5. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Whenever Omnath, Locus of Rage, or another elemental creature you control dies, Omnath deals 3 damage to target creature or player. As you'll see, there's a lot of alternate commanders for this deck as well, with Omnath, Borborygmos, Mina and Dag, the Grand Warlord, and so on. Anyway, up next we have an Outland Colosus. 3 and 2 green for a 6/6 with Renown 6. When this creature deals combat damage to a player, if it isn't renowned, put 6/1/1 counters on it, and it becomes renowned, and it can't be blocked by more than one creature. We have a Polyraptor, 6 and 2 green for a 5/5 with Enrage. Whenever Polyraptor is dealt damage, create a token that's a copy of Polyraptor. So if it takes damage, we can basically get another Polyraptor out that has the same ability as well. We have Primordial Hydra, X and 2 green for a 0/0. Enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Beginning of your upkeep, double the number of 1/1 counters on Primordial Hydra, and it has trample as long as it has 10 or more counters on it. We have Purphoros, God of the Forge, 3 and a red for a 6/5 with another god with Indestructible. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Purphoros isn't a creature. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Purphoros deals 2 damage to each opponent. 2 and a red, creatures you control get +1/+0 until the end of turn. So with Panharmonicon out, this will trigger, each creature that enters will basically trigger Purphoros, and then Panharmonicon will trigger Purphoros again. Next up, we have Savage Ventmaw, 4 and red and green for a 4/4 with Flying. Whenever it attacks, add 3 red and 3 green to your mana pool. Until the end of turn, this mana doesn't empty from your mana pool as steps and phases end. We have Silverclad Ferocidons, 5 and 2 red for an 8/5 with Enrage. Whenever it is dealt damage, each opponent sacrifices a permanent. We have Spellbreaker Behemoth, 1 and 1 red, 2 green for a 5/5. It can't be countered. Creature spells you control with power 5 or greater can't be countered. So some of our bigger creatures won't be able to get countered if this guy is out, and he can't get countered either. Next up, we have Tuskguard Captain, 2 and a green for a 2/3. Has Outlast, so pay green, tap it, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Outlast only as a sorcery. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. There's Ulasht and Hate Seed, we've already seen him. We have Vastwood Hydra, X and 2 green for a 0/0. Enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When Vastwood Hydra dies, you may distribute a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the number of counters on Vastwood Hydra among any number of creatures you control. And finally, we have Xenagos, God of Revels, 3 red and green for a 6/5 with Indestructible. As long as your devotion to red and green is less than 7, Xenagos isn't a creature. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature you control gains haste and gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is that creature's power. Then we're going to move into the enchantments. This is where the deck really starts to come together with some of the enchantments. So we're going to take a look here. First up, we have Burgeoning. 1 green, enchantment. Whenever an opponent plays a land, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. This will allow you to get multiple lands out really quickly. We have Doubling Season, 4 to green for an enchantment. If in effect we put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, it puts twice that many of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. And if in effect places 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it places twice as many of those counters on that permanent instead. So if a lot of the things that will add counters to things will get double counters, for example, if Polyraptor gets enraged and is dealt damage, we'll get, instead of one Polyraptor token, we'll get two Polyraptor tokens, and so on. We'll basically just be able to flood the board with certain types of tokens, as well as just put a ton of 1/1 counters on our creatures. Next up, we have Durable Handicraft, 1 and a green. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 if you do put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. I can also pay 5 and a green, sacrifice the enchantment to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So if doubling season, you're going to be putting 2 1/1 counters on each creature you control. You have Elemental Mastery, 3 and a red, enchant creature. The enchanted creature has tap, put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste into play, where X is a creature's power, removed from the game at the end of the turn. So we do this with a creature, we tap it, we put X tokens out. If we have doubling season, we get that X is doubled. We have Exploration, 1 green. You play an additional land on each of your turns. We have Familiar Ground, 2 and a green. Each creature you control can't be blocked by more than one creature. So this will make it so it's difficult to block, have double and triple blocking going on. So this will make it so my creatures can only be blocked by one creature. You have Impact Tremors, 1 and a red. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if we have doubling season out and we get a bunch of those elemental tokens, this thing will trigger for each of the elemental tokens. If we have Panharmonicon out, this will trigger an additional time for each of those tokens. We have Parallel Lives, 3 and a green. If an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, it puts twice that many of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. So this, coupled with doubling season, will get us, it'll basically double our double. So we'll get just a massive amount of tokens. Say we put out 2 elemental tokens, doubling season will put out 2 more, Parallel Lives will then put out that times 2. So if we put out 2, we'll get 2 times 2 times 2, basically, because you get 2 normally, 2 from doubling season, 2 more from Parallel Lives. We have Perilous Forays, 3 and 2 green. Pay 1, sacrifice a creature, search your library for a basic foray land card with a basic land type, and put it into play tapped, then shuffle your library. So if we want to get multiple lands out really quickly, we can sacrifice some of those like elemental tokens to be able to get more land into play. We have Retreat to Khazad-dû, 2 and a green, landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or you gain 2 life. So if we do that, let's say we got doubling season, we get 2 1/1 counters on the creature. Or we can also just gain life. Next up, we have Warstorm Surge, 5 and a red. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So with this, for example, I can have like a 1/1 elemental enter the battlefield. I could have Warstorm Surge trigger to hit my own Polyraptor so I get those tokens, or I can just have this trigger and deal damage to my opponents or their creature. But it's also possible to use this to trigger my Polyraptors to get more tokens as long as I'm doing something that doesn't kill the Polyraptor. We have Zendikar Royal, 3 and 2 green. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 2/2 green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Again, with doubling season, we'll get multiple tokens. See, I think that is all of our enchantments. We're going to move into our instants. I have 1 Naturalize, 1 and a green, destroy target artifact or enchantment. We have Reclaim, 1 green, put target card from your graveyard on top of your library. And you can do that at instant speed, so you can basically be able to be guaranteed to draw it on your next turn. We have Second Harvest, 2 and 2 green. For each token you control, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that permanent. This is a one-time use doubling spell, but if we have doubling season and Parallel Lives out, and we play this, we'll just get a massive amount of tokens. We have Solidarity of Heroes, 1 and a green. It has Strive, so it costs 1 and a green more to cast for each target beyond the first. Choose any number of target creatures, double the number of +1/+1 counters on each of them. So again, with doubling season, we'll get a massive amount of +1/+1 counters on our creatures. We have Vitalize, 1 green, untap all creatures you control. So you can basically just swing it with a bunch of creatures on your turn. During your opponent's turn, you can pay green and untap all of them. We have Wild Onslaught, 3 and a green. It has Kicker 4. It's additional pay, as if you cast it, you can pay additional 4 mana to get the Kicker effect. So put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. spell is kicked, put 2+1/+1 counters on each creature you control instead. And again, with Doubling Season, massive amount of counters. So that is it for our instance. We're going to move to our Planeswalkers. We have Domri Raid. 1 red and green, enters with 3 loyalty counters, or more if you have Doubling Season. Obviously, we'll give you counters for that as well. +1, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. -2, target creature you control fights another target creature. So I could use this to essentially like have one of my own elemental, my weak creatures, fight my Polyraptor to trigger its enrage ability, or have one of my creatures fight an opponent's creature. Or -7, you get an emblem of creatures you control, have double strike, trample, hexproof, and haste. Next up, we have Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, 1 and 2 green, enters with 3 loyalty. +1, put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield. Again, with Doubling Season, I'll get multiple tokens. What I really am using her for is her -2. So -2, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And then -7, which I probably never really use when I play this deck, is you gain X life, draw X cards, where X is the number of lands you control. I'm mostly concerned or wanting to use her -2 just to put a number of counters on each creature I control, and then possibly more with Doubling Season out. And finally, we have Xenagos, God of Revels, 2 red and green, or enters with 3 loyalty. +1, add X mana in any combination of red and or green to your mana pool, where X is the number of creatures you control. 0, put a 2/2 red and green standard creature token with haste onto the battlefield. Or -6, exile the top 7 cards of your library. You may put any number of creature and or land cards from among them onto the battlefield. I'm mostly using him for his +1, just to get a massive amount of mana, and possibly his 0 to create tokens. Again, with Doubling Season, we'll get multiple copies of those satyrs. And finally, into our sorceries, we have Joraga Invocation, 4 and 2 green. Each creature you control gets +3/+3 until the end of turn and must be blocked this turn if able. So basically, all your creatures, if you have like your token doubling out and all that, you're going to make all those creatures +3/+3, and you'll basically swing with a bunch of them, and they need to be blocked. And again, with Nylea's Bow in play, if that's out, they'll have Death Touch. You have Nissa's Pilgrimage, 2 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic forest cards, reveal those cards, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest into your hand, then shuffle your library. It also has Spell Mastery, so if there are 2 or more instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, search your library for up to 3 basic forests instead. We have Seasons Past, 4 and 2 green. Return any number of cards with different converted mana costs from your graveyard to your hand. Put Seasons Past on the bottom of the owner's library. So it's a good way to get spells back that have been possibly destroyed. So if somebody destroys Doubling Season, I can get that back. Because basically the way this spell works is you get 1 card that costs 1, 1 that costs 2, 1 that costs 3, 1 that costs 4, and all the way as far as you can go. And then those go into your hand, and then this goes on the bottom, so you have a chance of getting to it again, possibly. And finally, we have Thrive, X in green. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of X target creatures. So again, with Doubling Season, you're going to get multiple counters here. So the whole thing with the deck basically is token doubling, counter doubling, having Panharmonicon possibly trigger Purphoros multiple times, and maybe Altar of the Brood, have that go off to where I'm putting 20 tokens out. This will trigger that, and then Panharmonicon will trigger that as well. And then just creatures that have ways to become huge, or creatures that will allow me to put counters on other things, such as Managorger Hydra, and so on. So that is the deck. Again, we are using Ulasht the Hateseed as our commander. However, we have a ton of other creatures that can stand in for the commander. So the commanders, we have Xenagos, Ulasht the Hateseed, we have Mina and Dead Wildborn, Grand Warlord Radha, and Borborygmos. So we have about several different creatures that could actually stand in as the commander. This deck initially started off as a where did he go? I forgot. Omnath. He was my original commander, and then I discovered Ulasht with his token ability. So basically, With Doubling Season, Ulasht will just enter with a massive amount of token or a massive amount of counters. And then we could essentially, if he doesn't get countered and we have something like Warstorm Surge in play, you just have him deal a ton of damage to our opponents. So I've been building this deck for just probably a few years now. So basically just go back to it every once in a while and tweak it. Let me know in the comments what you think of the deck. That's going to do it for this video. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again for watching and take care.